Okay, good morning now. Welcome to another edition of the newspaper review here on Lagoon Radio, your number one online gospel radio station powered by the Diocese of Lagos Anglican Communion. My name is Taiwa Deola Shabiligbe, but in the meantime, you can like and follow us on all our social media platforms. On Facebook is at Lagoon Radio Nigeria, on Instagram and Twitter is at Lagoonradio.Ng. You can also download the Lagoon Radio app on Google Play Store and App Store, irrespective of the device that you use. I have with me in the studio Konsola Alao. We'll be doing the review together, as you know. In no particular order, we have the Nigerian News Direct, we have This Nigeria, we have Daily Champion, we have Daily Independent. Controversy rages. I don't know why he makes this paper for the Al Jazeera. We have Blueprint, we have Leadership, we have This Day, we have Nigerian Tribune, we have New Telegraph, we have Daily Trust, and of course, National Economy. So we try as much as possible to cover all these papers before we leave here today. So I'll be starting with the Nigerian News Direct. At the very top of the paper, maritime crimes cost Nigeria 329.5 billion naira. Commodore Efedua says the story is on page 16. Dangote Refinery awards scholarship to students in host communities, page 19 as well. Senate directive, AMCON may publish debtors list in January. The story is on page 2. You can read up on that. Omicron, federal government urges UK to lift ban on Nigeria travelers. And the writer to the story says Labour's decision on fair discriminatory ban will affect tourism, major exporting sectors at the Burua, as Health Minister Permanent Secretary absent at COVID-19 summit. All this you can read up on page 4 of the Nigerian News Direct. 3 trillion naira foreign trade deficit. Nigerians import 8.2 trillion naira, rises by 60.78% against 5.1 trillion naira export. You can read up that on page 17. Nigerians tax to GDP ratio only accurate when state local government other revenues are included, says FIRS. The story is on page 2. You can read up on that. ICT Innovation Exhibition will promote indigenous content development, says NCC. You can read up on page 8. EcoBank appoints new MD for CBN's approval, page 16 of the Nigerian News Direct. Man 24 to die by hanging for killing brother. This you can read up on page 4 of the Nigerian News Direct.
Moving on to this Nigerian newspaper this morning, Ijaw women seek justice for slain Dowen College students. Family demands coroner inquest. You can read up on page 9. That at 25 says equity, justice, path to progress, says Falano, Ezekome, Sani and others, as Governor Wike, Oyetola, Inoson and others bag awards on page 5 of This Nigerian newspaper. As regards COVID-19 Omicron travel ban, federal government knocks United Kingdom. It's discrimination partial, not science-based. Nigeria High Commissioner, it is return of apartheid. BA continues flight to Nigeria. Nigeria's foreign trade is 13.3 trillion naira as FIRS generates 4.9 trillion naira in 11 months, says page 13 of This Nigerian newspaper. And finally, 41 billion naira debt as electricity workers shut down Abuja, Nasarawa, Niger and Kogi states on page 13 of This Nigerian newspaper.
All right, moving on to the Daily Champion newspaper. At the very top of the paper, we have FIRS collected 4.9 trillion naira taxes in 2021, says chairman. You can read up on that on page 6. Senate uncovers how PEF placed 34 billion naira in fixed deposit account without remitting interest to federal government. You can read up on that on page 5. And the major headline there says Nigeria's trade deficit hit 3 trillion naira in the third quarter, says MBS. The story is on page 6, and the writer to the story says total imports gross 8.2 trillion naira as against 5.1 trillion export. 2023, court to rule on articles eligibility for contest in February next year. You can read up on that on page 8. Omicron, UK travel ban on Nigerians not justified, says federal government. And the writer to the story says, impose similar sanction on British citizens. Fankayode urges Buhari, get vaccinated, stay safe. COVID urges citizens. The story, all this you can read up on page 12 of the Daily Champion. And still on the paper, we've submitted to Will of Allah, say parents whose 7 children died in abandoned car. It's such a disaster, but you can continue reading on page 4. Dowen College, Oromi's death, a slap on education sector, heartbreaking, says Sanwo-Olu's wife. Uh, Takes advocacy against SGBV to schools. The story is on page 4. You can read up on that. Jam to clear backlog on 706,189 illegal admissions, says registrar. You can read up on that on page 7. Dangote Refinery awards scholarships to students in host communities. The story is on page 8. 20 graduating students badge first class degrees in Alex Ekweme Varsity, says Vice Chancellor. You can read up on this on page 4 of the Daily Champion newspaper.
Very quickly, moving on to the Daily Independent newspaper, protesting AEDC workers plunge Abuja, Niger, and other states into darkness. You can read up more on page 26 of the Daily Independent newspaper. British Airways bars Nigerians on board its flights, and the writer on that says Ojikutu links ban to economic diplomat issues. UK's action more of emotional than scientific, minister says on page 29. Moving on to the major headline, insecurity won't stop investors coming to Nigeria, presidency says on page 6 of the Daily Independent newspaper. And moving on to the editorials by the side, Dowens College students dead, big slap on Lagos, Sanwo-Olu's wife says on page 6. NAS will insist on prudent use of COVID-19 funds, Senate President says on page 7. Supreme Court airs Secondus appeal, challenging removal today on page 7. Still on another major headline as regards COVID-19 Omicron, as federal government kicks against restrictions imposed on Nigerian travelers, and the writer on that says vaccines to cover 70% of population are available. You can read up all of this and more on page 6 of the Daily Independent newspaper. While federal government launched virtual court in prison, page 6. Federal government to establish 6 planned health clinics on page 2. And finally, pirates abduct civil defense officer, 4 others in Bayelsa State on page 5 of the Daily Independent newspaper.
All right, moving quickly to Al Jazeera, Nigeria. Controversy rages over travel ban. The story is on page 8, and the writer to it says Nigeria's addition to red list discriminatory, says federal government. CSOs others kick. All this you can read up on page 8. CBN funding to create industry 5 billion naira, says Emefiele. The story is on the front page, and you can continue reading on page 25 of the Al Jazeera newspaper. Editorial, courtesan storming schools in Nigeria. It's the stories on the front page, and you can continue reading on page 3. 2023 presidency, 2023 presidency, court fixes February 21 on articles eligibility. The story is on the front page, and you can continue reading on page 30 of the paper. On business economy, blackout eats Abuja environs as AEDC workers shut down facilities. The story is on page 26. You can read up on that. And on politics and policy, APC governors in fierce battle over Tinubu's ambition. The story is on page 30. You might want to read up on that. And news, 3 Nigerians returnees test positive for Omicron in India. The story is on page 12. EFCC, ICPC, CCB recover 900 billion naira looted assets in 20 years. It was reported. The story is on page 13 on Al Jazeera Nigerian newspaper.
So moving on to the Blueprint newspaper this morning, FIRC boss Nami advocates accurate tax to GDP ratio computation on page 22. Abia and 4 states in darkness as electricity workers shut facilities. These states include Nasarawa, Kogi, Edo, Niger states as affected. You can read up on page 6. As regards 2023 elections, court rules on articles eligibility February 21st in contesting for the elections on page 5. MTN shareholders lose 468 billion naira in profits, taken as share price slumps on page 22 of the Blueprint newspaper. Federal government to UK on Omicron, travel ban on Nigeria lacks common sense, not science driven. The writer under that says, decision discriminatory punitive urges review, wants access to vaccine address, not emotion-based actions. Let the world know that no one is safe unless everyone is safe. It is travel appetite Nigerian envoy to UK. British Airways resumes operation and list conditions. All of this and more you can read up on page 6. COVID-19 says 70% of Nigerians to be vaccinated by 2022. SGF Mustafa says on page 5. Cameroonian refugees in Nigeria pass 70,000 mark. UNHCR says on page 13. Eating cashew has immense health benefits. RMDC Director General says on page 14. 8 dead children in abandoned car says we have submitted to the will of Allah, parents say on page 6. 32-year-old man arrested for beating cigarette seller to death over 15 naira in Ogun State can be found on page 4 of the Blueprint newspaper.
All right, moving on to the Leadership newspaper. The major headline there says controversy trails 42 billion naira NAS complex renovation contract. And the writer to the story says contractor has no record of previous jobs, official address untraceable. Original builders bid 27 billion naira but was overlooked. Reps deny on the dealing in contract award. Award of contract followed due process, BPP. No contract has been awarded, says FCDA. FEC to decide on project tomorrow. All this you can read up on page 4 of the Leadership newspaper. Power Minister, NERC intervene as AEDC workers shelf strike. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 7. Again, bandits kidnapped 36 in Kaduna community. You can read up on that on page 15. AMCON to publish debtors list in January. The story is on page 25. Sylvester Oromi, family demands coroner's inquest. The story is on page 16. Aung San Suu Kyi sentenced to 2 years in jail. The story is on page 32. Yeah, it's quite tiny, but the story is there on the Leadership newspaper. And UK travel ban on Nigerian unjust discriminatory, says federal government. The story is on page 27. Kanu crisis, APC distance itself from parallel Congress. The story is on page 6 of the Leadership newspaper. I think that's all on the front page.
So moving on to this day newspaper, Ghana Buhari's failure to implement 2014 confab report, terrible mistake, says Nigeria better off together. You can read up more on page 6. Emirates resumes flight to Nigeria on page 6 of the This Day newspaper. And major headline says red list as UK under fire for travel appetite against Nigeria. The writer under that says federal government funds and insists ban discriminatory unfair appetite, saying that ban targeted at poor countries. Kingdom kicks against restrictions, call for global collaborations, not as deadly as to warrant flight restrictions. COVID apps on mass vaccination to prevent virus spread. Biden's medical advisor orders Nigerians to boost jabs. UN condemns Britain and others for travel bans and appetite, says it's targeted to poor countries. Fails to red list 17 European countries despite recording Omicron. Touring Lekki deep seaport. You can read up more on page 10 of this Nigerian newspaper. Despite federal government's plea, electricity workers cripple power supply in Abuja and its environs on page 6. And that is it about this paper.
All right, moving on to the Nigerian Tribune. At the very top, special report. 7 reasons Nigerians Agric Research Institute are on lockdown. You might want to read up that on page 8. Students risk losing $17 trillion in lifetime earnings to COVID-19, says report. The story is on page 25. Ikoyi building collapse. Why tribunal report is delayed, says member. The story is on page 27. ASU to federal government. You will hear from us within 24 hours. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 24. Travel red list. Nigeria AFDB slam UK. Say ban unfair, not backed by science. The story you can read on pages 5 and pages 25 of the Nigerian Tribune. And the writer to that says, federal government explains why Ramaphosa's visit was not stopped. Tomori blames federal government. Says it condoned errors of commission. Why UK added Nigerian to travel red list. High Commissioner. All this you can read up on pages 5 and pages 25. COVID-19 response. Lagos Kano got Lions share of 10 billion naira, 5 billion naira each, says PSC. Fuel price, NLC vows to shut down economic activities, begins mobilization. The story you can read up on pages 8. Darwin College deceased family hires Falano, SAN files coroner's inquest. The story you can read up on pages 27 of the Nigerian Tribune.
Moving on to the New Telegraph newspaper, AFCFTA, Nigeria to lose 566 billion naira to non-execution. Manufacturers flay federal government's code approach on page 3 of the New Telegraph. AMCON to publish debtors list in January. You can read up on page 2. TCN, strike disrupt power supply to FCT and 5 states. You can read up more on page 6. Third quarter of the year 2021, Nigeria records 3 million naira trade deficit, and it says SMO confirms $4 billion approved external borrowing realized, page 6 and page 25 of the New Telegraph. Court to determine article's fate on 21st of February 2022 as regards 2023 elections as Malami approaches virtual court in Jungle facility. You can read up more on page 6. Saboteurs pulling down Buhari's government, Bello alleges on page 6. Moving to the major headline, which is travel ban, OPS and economists raise the alarm over investment disruption. You can read up more on page 2, page 3, and page 8. The rider under that says predict recession in the first quarter of 2022, foresee drop in FDIs, cost of production to rise investors. Nigerian carriers brace up for massive flight cancellation. Diaspora Nigerians await December 20th ban review. UK's action discriminatory, punitive to federal government. Darwin College family demands coroner inquest on Sylvester's death as college takes to online classes. Whiskey links within school. You can read up all of this on page 30. Federal government warned military against politicking as army vows to sustain support for democracy on page 3. On page 26, studies links high heart rate to dementia risk. All of this you can find on the front page of the New Telegraph newspaper.
All right, moving on to the Daily Trust newspaper. FIRS moves to capture MDA's revenue waivers as taxes. Electoral Act, INEC replies Buhari's back amendment. This you can read up on page 12. Kano APC crisis. Tinubu to meet Ganduje as field threatens 2023 ambition. And the writer to that says Boni committee reaffirms support for governor's faction. Shekarau met Ashiwaju without our consent. G7 sources. Abbas faction files appeal against ex-governor. Or just you can read up on page 5. Has to decide on first strike tomorrow. The stories. You said ha. Well, like I hope federal government would akin to their voice. Well, the story is on page 2. Zamfara, 6 killed as bandits block Kora Namoda Road. Yeah, you can read up that on page 32. Yeah, please read Abuja community shoot DSS official, arrest 37 residents. This you can read up on page 28. Omicron, federal government rejects ban, accuses UK of travel apartheid. And the writer to that says Britain exempts students, work visa applicants from travel ban. National Assembly demands prudent use of COVID-19 funds. Will vaccinate 70% of Nigerians by 2022, says SGF. The story is on page 4, and that'll be all on the Daily Trust newspaper.
So moving on to our final newspaper for today's newspaper review, the National Economy newspaper says national and Nigerians foreign trade is 13.3 trillion naira, NBS says on page 4. Hope of cost-effective power supply dims for Nigeria as Naira slides makes 100% imported electricity components unaffordable on page 4 of the National Economy newspaper. EcoBank Group names Lawa Regional Executive MD designates on page 5. National government cares will enable state earn $20 million in 2 years, says World Bank on page 5. And on the column session, the leaders to watch is Ogochukwu Eze Ekadem on human relations experts at Union Bank. You can read up more on the front page of the National Economy for all of these stories.
All right, I think that will be all. We're able to cover all the papers. That will be all on the newspaper review this morning. This comes up every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. on Lagoon Radio. You can like and follow us on all our social media platforms. On Facebook is at Lagoon Radio Nigeria, on Instagram and Twitter is at Lagoonradio.Ng. Tomorrow is going to be another edition you don't want to miss. My name is Taiwo Atiola Shabiolebe, and thanks to Koinsola Alawo, my co-host. Good morning and stay connected.
You are listening to Lagoon.